Have you ever woken to a silence so complete it feels like the world has been erased? I did, alone in a tree-ringed clearing, boots still muddy, campfire dead, listening to a slow sound that wasn't raccoon, wind, or engine. What would you do if something watched you and didn't blink? My name is Jonah Whitfield. I'm 34, and this happened on October 14, 2019. I tell you that up front because details matter the way breath matters in the woods. You can't get them back once they escape. I was a project manager in Nashville then, restless in the way a man gets when city lights stop convincing him he's alive. Marcus Boone, a college buddy who still lived for backpacking, suggested Blackwood Ridge for a no-frills, off-grid weekend. Blackwood Ridge is the kind of place whose map marker is a single, stubborn dot and whose directions end in, "You'll know it when you find it." We had a fourth, Evan Landry, quiet with an easy laugh, but Evan backed out 2 days before with something about obligations and a cough. Marcus shrugged and said, "Double the ghost stories for us," like that made the absence less weighty. We left on a crisp Saturday, trucks loaded with what City Logic called essentials: freeze-dried meals, a tiny stove, rope, a flashlight with 2-week batteries, and an old thermal blanket my grandmother had given me. We parked where the ranger's gravel gave up to scrub and followed a deer path that narrowed into a trail until it didn't. By noon, we were in a pocket of trees that felt older than county lines. The place had names locals used in half-jokes: Raven Hollow, Old Man's Knife, but we wrote them off as tourist signs. The real name felt like the one you get only when you listen: Blackwood. The trunks were black with lichen, like columns of charcoal, and a low mist from the river knitted everything into a dim velvet. Before the main event, before the thing that kept me awake for months, let me sketch who we were and how the night arranged itself. I had been dating a woman named Claire for 3 years then. She'd teased me about my frontier fantasies and had sworn never to come camping with me because she could never trust the bathroom situation. Marcus had a dogged, comforting bravado and a crooked scar on his left eyebrow from a long-ago bike accident. He carried a hunting knife he never used but polished like a prayer. Evan, who canceled, would have been the one to raise practical questions: routes, emergency contacts. But he wasn't there, and absence has a way of becoming part of the plot. We set our campsite in a small clearing beside a creek that sounded like a conversation in a language I almost understood. The sky was pale. Leaves were the color of dull coins. Marcus wanted to try a new backcountry trailhead at daylight, but darkness came faster than we expected. We had a late dinner, told stories, truer ones about exes and failed startups and the exaggerated kind with bear attacks and night creatures with glowing eyes. I remember laughing because we were men who found humor a useful armor. There were small things that night I didn't register as warnings. A thin line of broken twigs leading away from the clearing like a fingerprint. A crow that perched too close and refused to fly away. The radio in Marcus's truck, left on as a joke, had a burst of static that sounded for a heartbeat like a voice whispering and then nothing. At 11:30, the wind dropped. In the trees that sound should have become familiar. Branches rubbing, squirrels muttering, the creek's tone. But instead, there was a patient, low rhythm, like someone breathing between songs. Marcus called it woods sleep. I foolishly believed him. I told myself, as men tell themselves, that fear is a theatrical thing, something you arrange in your head from movie scenes and old campfire tales. I had done plenty of solo hikes. I knew how to ration water, when to stay put, how to read a map. We zipped our tent, propped the stove away, and Marcus joked about an extra round of s'mores. Then, the barking started. Not Marcus's dog. There was no dog, but a distant, layered barking that carried through trees like it had learned to borrow the language of other sounds. It wasn't a single pattern. It broke into uneven pulses, and then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Marcus sat up like a man who'd been pretending to sleep and said, "Probably coyotes." I agreed aloud and did not feel the agreement in my ribs. I want to pause here because stories in the woods always pretend there's a simple cause. People find a sound, they find a source, and the fear is rationalized. That night had no tidy rationalization. The barking skated across the clearing 3 times, each time closer, each time folding back into silence as if someone were testing the perimeter like gloved fingers on a window. When it stopped, Coffee-cold silence rolled back in. I pressed my ear to the tent fabric and heard something else. Tapping, but patient, as if someone were counting the tent's seams. We didn't leave, because that's the other human habit. Committing to inconvenience rather than confronting the unknown. We argued about mattresses and batteries, about whether the sound came from animals or neighbors. Marcus suggested an overnight hike to shake the nerves. I suggested we build a bigger fire. We did both badly. The fire spat but never took a proper hold, and our flashlight, the bright one we shared as a joke about being prepared, flickered like a stubborn heartbeat. At some point, I noticed that the path we had taken, 2 boot prints, then a small animal's shuffle, had a new set of prints layered over them. They were not human. They were elongated, toe-like impressions that stepped again and again, always in the spaces between our prints. They pointed toward the trees, not away. That's when the main story begins. The hour when choices matter less than reactions, when your body decides to be honest, and your voice decides to betray you. The night rearranged itself into a series of sharp, exact moments that I can still call up. The flashlight cutting through a column of fog, the shape beyond the creek that might have been a man or might have been a shadow, the moment a twig snapped 30 feet behind us as if someone had finally chosen to announce their presence. I unzipped the tent because courage is sometimes just air. Marcus was already out, knuckles white around his knife, the beam of his flashlight trembling like a lighthouse with seasickness. The barking started again, this time directly behind us, but also ahead as if it were orbiting. A shape moved across the creek, not tall enough to be a man standing, but something crooked and deliberate, stepping with purpose. It paused, and for the first time I saw 2 small glints where eyes would be if they were eyes. We called out. Our voices sounded thin, like fishing line. The shape responded with a sound that was remarkably like imitation, like someone practicing a laugh in an empty theater. It moved closer, stepping in and out of tree trunks like a poorly thrown shadow. Then it stopped, right behind the old log we had used as a bench, and knocked the wood twice, soft as bone. I will tell you exactly what I did next, because the truth is a poor, merciless teacher. I ran. Marcus grabbed my sleeve, half drag, half plea. We stumbled through roots and leaves. The flashlight swung like mad compasses. The barking tore at the air. Something scratched my backpack. Tiny talons? A hand? The sound was dry and furious. I heard Marcus curse, high and raw. We reached the truck, breath waterlogged, and the truck wouldn't start. The engine turned a desperate slow, like a heart trying to learn how. The knocking at the log started again, 3 beats, then a pause, and then 3 beats. An impossible rhythm we had never heard before, yet understood in the marrow. At that moment, the forest felt like an audience waiting for the last line. I started the truck on the 4th try, tires biting gravel, headlights slashing. The clearing gave up black shapes. In my rearview mirror, a small, hunched silhouette stood still at the edge of the tree line. It lifted something, maybe a hand, maybe nothing. And for 1 second, the world narrowed to that figure and the terrible little choreography between our breaths. Marcus and I didn't speak until we were 2 miles down the road when the trembling in his hands stopped, and he laughed, a dry, broken noise that could have been a sob. Weeks later, I learned that other hikers had reported similar sounds in pockets of Blackwood Ridge, snap patterns that mimicked human movement, lights that moved like grenades in fog. Some blamed pranksters. Others said coyotes or feral dogs. The official record is a tidy thing. Nothing found, no evidence. But the impression remained, like a bruise you find months after a fall. Marcus stopped going on long excursions. I stopped sleeping under the trees. Sometimes, when the city is too loud and my apartment feels small, my mind walks back to that clearing and counts the beats. 3. Pause. 3. Until I realize I'm holding my own breath. If you go into the deep woods, they will give you stories. Some you bring with you, equipment lists, directions, training. Some the woods give in return, like bartered coins stamped with months or years. I traded a long, easy confidence for a night that taught me how silence can be full, how eyes can be patient, how the world keeps strange hours when we're pretending to be brave. There are nights I still wake up expecting that careful counting knock on distant wood. I tell myself the next time I'll be braver, smarter, less gullible. But bravery is not the same as sense, and the woods will always be a place where sense gets rewritten. I tell this now because I promised myself honesty, because when you tell a true story, you owe the listener the chance to decide whether they will stay or go. I stayed. I left. I learned. And the sounds, whatever living thing made them, remained. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 29, and on October 14, 2019, I learned that some noises in the woods are not wind. They are warnings. Have you ever felt a small, undeniable voice inside your ribs whispering, "You shouldn't be here"? That voice is what kept me alive. I still tell the story because people need to hear how easily ordinary plans bend into something else. I grew up in the suburbs of Ohio, loved weekends that smelled like campfire and motor oil and thought I knew the rules. Respect the weather, pack extra socks, leave no trace. That October, my buddies, Logan Price and Jonah Hale, convinced me to take one last deep woods run before winter closed in. We picked Blackwood Ridge because it was remote. The maps called it Untamed, and because Logan liked places with names that felt dangerous. He said the same thing about every hike and then laughed when I pretended to be scared. There were three of us. Me, Logan, and Jonah. Logan, 31, with a crooked front tooth and a tendency to hoard chocolate bars. Jonah, 28, practical, with an old army jacket. He refused to retire. We rented a beat-up Subaru, loaded sleeping bags, a single lantern, and a questionable cooler of beer. Blackwood Ridge, an old logging area reclaimed by saplings and ferns, was 2 hours from town and had one dirt road in. People around the diner had shrugged when we mentioned it. Old haunt, one said. Beautiful in the fall, another offered. No one warned us about the creek that sounded like metal scraping on glass, or the way the map stopped listing roads and started listing contour lines like a fingerprint. Before the trip, I, like any good storyteller, rehearsed the tone. I told my girlfriend, Claire, where I'd be and when I'd be back. I took a photograph of the trailhead sign and sent it with a joke. I wanted witnesses, little safety talismans, texts that could be used by someone to find me if I went wrong. Everything felt ordinary. We made plans over pizza, hike in Saturday, set 2 miles from camp, spend the night, hike out Sunday morning for coffee in town. Simple. The first day was exactly like that suburban nostalgia. We walked in through a highway of maples set on fire by autumn, the light a soft orange that made everything look safer. We talked about jobs, exes, the men we were trying to become. Logan told a story about trapping a raccoon in his kid's backyard. We laughed. And Jonah kept scanning the tree line in that watchful way he had, as if his eyes had replaced the rearview mirror. We chose a flat clearing near Sable Creek for our tent, a place where the trees opened like a mouth. We set camp, pitched a small fire, and ate cold chili out of tin bowls. At dusk, the woods hummed and the stars fell out in a perfect scatter. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. The first strange thing was small, a stump placed at the edge of the clearing, not felled by nature but arranged, its rings worn to a pale disc. Logan joked it was art. Jonah said he'd seen piles like it before, people leaving markers, tourists, kids. I shrugged it off. Later, when the fire was low and the beer had softened our edges, a pattern emerged on the other side of the creek. 3 rocks stacked, then 4, then 2. Someone was playing at arranging nature. It felt silly and primitive, like a private code. We made up stories, squatters, lovers, bored hunters. The woods listened and kept its secrets. What I didn't know then was the way the woods have timelines of their own. A place records small intrusions. A broken twig, the smell of cigarette smoke, a tent peg hammered into soft earth, and it answers those intrusions in ways you do not expect. We left a small light on inside the tent because we were lazy. We left food in the car because we thought bears would be the only inconvenience. We left our attention scattered across jokes and beers. The rules I thought I'd always followed were already bending. By midnight, the air changed. It wasn't colder. It was thicker. The sounds shifted from cricket to something like careful footsteps that never fully crossed the creek. Jonah, who slept light, woke and sat with the lantern, his jaw tight. Logan, who snored like a freight train, went silent and then whispered, "Did you hear that?" I did, a high, slow rasp in the distance, almost human, almost machine. We told each other that it was an animal, a truck on a far road, anything. It's funny how definitive you can be when you are scared enough to lie to yourself. Around 1:12 a.m., the sound became a pattern. A deliberate tap, tap, pause. Then again. It was too rhythmic for a deer, too patient for wind. We grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the sound, because of course we did. Curiosity is human, and survival is sometimes folly. We kept to the trees and moved across a carpet of wet leaves. The beam swept across saplings and a line of footprints that stopped at the creek and then continued on the far bank. The prints were not ours. They were too large and spaced too evenly. They had a heel that dug and a toe that gripped. They moved parallel to us as if whatever made them watched from the other side. The main story starts here, when the plan fractured and the world narrowed to one person's breath, one man's decisions. We thought we were safe because we were together. We thought the creek made a boundary. I thought the footprints were a prank. I was wrong in every comforting way. When I stepped closer to the creek bank to follow the prints, the beam of my flashlight caught on something hanging from a branch. A small piece of cloth, faded and frayed, knotted into the bark like a charm. It had belonged to a shirt, the weave familiar and domestic. My stomach dropped. Jonah swore softly. Logan, pale in the lantern light, motioned for us to go back and then answered his fear with bravado. He wanted proof, or at least the illusion of control. The three of us argued in whispers about calling it in, about retreating to the car, about staying put until morning. None of us volunteered to climb the bank and follow the prints across. We made the wrong choice. We stayed. At 2:04 a.m., our lantern went out. Not because of wind, not because of water. It simply died like a heartbeat stopped mid-sentence. In the dark, the woods took a new shape. I heard something move behind us in a way that suggested more than one set of feet. Something brushed the tent with the gentleness of a hand testing fabric. I felt watched in the way people feel in the final minute of a long play. All eyes in the house have turned on the stage. Logan whispered that he saw eyes, two reflections in the black, low in the trees. Jonah held my shoulder so hard I could feel the strain in his fingers. We heard a voice, or something that wanted to be a voice, saying a single word, leave. When you hear a command like that from the dark, the world becomes a tunnel. Time condenses. My training, simple, practical things learned from childhood camping, fought a losing battle with instinct. Leave to where? The road was 2 hours away through terrain that could easily swallow a person's heat signature. Stay and try to outwait what moved in the dark. We argued, the kind of argument that is mostly breath and sorrow. Jonah wanted to pack and go. Logan wanted to call for help. I wanted to wake Claire to hear a tethered voice say, come back. We packed. We crept to the Subaru like thieves in a holy place, trying not to make any noise that would wake whatever had been setting markers on trees. The car was where we thought safety lived. We were wrong. Outside, something had been in our camp. Small things had been shifted. A boot turned, a wrapper laid on the stump like a note. The hatch of the Subaru had been unlatched, and a scrap of paper tucked under the wiper, 3 short lines in a hand that trembled with wind or age. It read, "We don't like strangers." The handwriting might have been a joke, but the meaning was not. I drove. Logan rode shotgun without speaking. Jonah sat in the back trying to see the dark. The dirt road back was the kind of place that swallows headlights. Every reflector was a pair of eyes. We took it slow because we were terrified of running into someone or something waiting at the next bend. I felt watched by the black trees, and I felt the shape of the world tilt as if the forest had rearranged itself behind us, closing the map. We made it to the highway at 3:48 a.m. The town looked the same. A strip of solar-lit normality, but it felt like a stage set that had been rearranged without our permission. The three of us promised not to tell a lot of people the details. You'd trade privacy for an explanation, and none of us wanted the interrogation that might follow. I told Claire we'd been scared by hunters and left out the part where letters appeared on our car. I told my parents that we'd had a rough night and omitted the way the woods had spoken. It's 2 years later now, past the season, past the maples. And I still think about the arranged stumps, the prints, the scrap of cloth. There are nights when I wake sweating, convinced I left something in the clearing. Truth is funny. People want evidence. They want to file reports. We had footprints and a note and a story, and that was not enough for a file. The woods take your things and return only memories. I keep the photograph of the trailhead and the text threads that show my last I'm okay. I tell this story not to frighten, but to remind. The woods are older than our jokes. They keep their own calendar. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. My name is Jacob Whitman. I'm 28, and on October 12, 2022, something walked just beyond the ring of my campfire, and it wasn't human. Have you ever felt the forest hold its breath? That night, the woods held theirs, and I learned how loud a single silence can be. I tell this as plainly as I can because the facts are stubborn. Why I went, where I went, who I went with, what we brought, and what we thought we knew about the woods. People ask if I was stupid or brave. The honest answer is both and neither. I grew up in suburban Ohio with a father who taught me how to pack a backpack like it was a rite of passage. I loved camping the way some people love church, reverent, regular, and necessary. So when my college friend Miles Thornton called in late summer and said, "Let's take a deep woods trip, no cell, no roads, just 3 nights at Blackwater Hollow," I said yes before I thought about it. Miles' 30 steady hands, a quiet laugh, was the kind of friend who planned everything down to the spare batteries. He used to work outdoors and had a map-reading confidence that made me feel safe. He brought Derek Blakely, a skinny freelance photographer with a talent for rare angles and a curious streak that sometimes tipped into rashness. Derek loved strange textures and would bring home photos of peeling paint or abandoned porches. The idea of photographing an untouched hollow thrilled him. Blackwater Hollow sits in the far eastern reaches of Silver Pine National Forest, a place most maps treat politely with a name and a dashed line. Locals in the nearest town, Hemlock Ridge, warned us about the drive. Gravel chewing at tires, a 1-lane bridge painted a tired red, and a ranger station that closed at dusk. We planned a 4-day loop, hike in on Thursday morning, set camp near the old creek, explore a ridge Miles had heard local hunters talk about, then hike back Sunday. We planned gear lists with the same precision as a small military operation. Synthetic sleeping bags, a 3-person tent, a Dutch oven, 2 headlamps, a compass, maps, an extra gallon of water, and a backup burner. The plot I told myself beforehand was tidy. This trip would be a reset from the city and a chance to shoot a portfolio for Derek. We'd tell each other stories around the fire, maybe drink some cheap whiskey Miles swore by. I practiced my storyteller voice at home in the mirror, an actor of my own life, planning to open with a joke and close with a confession. That's the thing about plans. They adorn the truth, but they don't change the wood beneath them. Characters matter in these tales. Miles was the pragmatic leader. He was the one with the map and the gung-ho we-can-do-it energy. Derek was the wild card. 10 minutes from brilliance, 10 from trouble, always angling for a photograph that would make him famous. There was also me, cautious, curious, and anchored by the memory of my father's rules. Leave no trace, respect the land, behave like a guest. We were the kind of trio who could get along for hours and then trip on the smallest misunderstanding. Underlying all that was the terrain. Blackwater Hollow itself, a bowl of old pines and moss-choked rock where the creek ran around a sliver of bedrock, and the canopy made night fall like a curtain. In the week before the trip, I read threads from hikers who claimed to have weird experiences. A feeling, whispers, dogs that wouldn't enter a clearing. I told myself those were confirmation bias, stories cyclists tell to make their routes scarier. Still, I marked the date, October 12, on my calendar because the leaves were supposed to be at peak color and the nights crisp. We left the city on October 11th after work, packed the tent on top of Derek's old Jeep, and took the county road that became a disappearing act. Hemlock Ridge looked exactly like every small American town. A diner, a hardware store, a bulletin board with lost cat flyers. We picked up a local map at the ranger's table and one last admonition from an older man sweeping the diner porch. Beware the low fog around the creek. It'll play tricks on you. We hiked in Thursday morning with a light drizzle that felt honest, the kind that belongs to moss rather than umbrellas. The trailhead was unmarked, more a sag in the brush than a proper path. For the first 2 days, nothing extraordinary happened, just the warm, small miracles of wildlife and weather. We found an old trapper's lean-to, a rusted tin can fused to the ground by lichen, and a stone place where generations had warmed their hands. Derek took pictures of a bent sapling and called it an art piece. Miles joked about living off-grid forever. We laughed like it meant nothing could go wrong. It was late Friday afternoon, 5 hours into a detour Miles swore would only add an hour when the weather nudged from polite to peculiar. The creek widened into a shallow pool, and the fog rolled in faster than the light fell. The world lost its edges. Trees became silhouettes, and the sound of our boots on leaf litter softened into a slow, rolling hush. I remember thinking how beautiful the fog was, how soft it made every surface, because my brain seeks beauty even as it catalogs danger. We set camp near a natural rock outcropping, pitched the tent, and Miles lit the fire. The daytime animal sounds dimmed as if someone clipped their wings. We should have left at that first wrongness, at the sudden hush, at the way the fog clung a little too eagerly to the trunks. But story logic is greedy. It wants to stretch moments into meaning. Instead of packing up, Derek went to scout the creek for a shot. He stepped into the fog and 10 minutes later returned utterly still, photographs in his hand and a pale look we couldn't place. He said nothing at first, then fussed with his camera and told us to come look. The pictures were flat, like posters, nothing alive in them. In one, the creek bent and a shape registered on the far bank, a darker knot among the trees, like a person who had forgotten how to stand. We laughed it off as a trick of light, an artful blur. That night, under the low canopy, the fire felt less like a boundary and more like a small island. We said the things people say around fires, jokes about ghost stories, a song we'd all sung in college, a promise to keep the trip simple. I keep track of the minutes now, the way certain hours in that evening stretched and splintered. Around midnight, slumped in my sleeping bag, I first heard it. A crunching, not the gait of a deer or the small patter of a raccoon. It was measured and deliberate, like someone walking on broken glass. The sound moved just outside the firelight, pausing and then shifting. Miles stirred and hissed softly for me to be quiet. The three of us listened while the forest held its breath. Then something tapped the tent, a single hard tap, right against the fabric where my head lay. That's where the main story begins. The tap was made by wind. It had intention. When Derek unzipped the tent and peered out, the fog was thicker, closer, as if the night itself had leaned in to listen. Outside the tent, in the weak circle of the remaining embers, stood a shape that was neither man nor animal at first glance. It was tall, elongated by the fog, with shoulders that hunched oddly and a head that cocked like an animal listening to a very private joke. It didn't move as a human would. It flowed, as if the fog itself had learned to take a form. Its presence made all other noises die. Miles whispered, "Stay inside." I can still hear the tremor in his voice. The thing, if thing is the word, didn't approach directly. It circled at a distance, inspecting the light like a child inspecting a new toy. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Not words, but a low vibration that settled under the ribs, a sound like wind being pushed through a set of teeth. We smelled something when it breathed. Old leaves and a wet, metallic tang that made my stomach lurch. We did everything we were taught not to do in movies. Derek stepped out with the camera, asking questions no one should ask. The shape turned toward him, and in that tilt, there was a fleeting human recognition. Eyes, if those were eyes, that flared with something like curiosity and hunger. Derek's camera clicked, and in the flash we saw more detail. The creature's skin was mottled like bark, and it had long fingers tipped with something black and blunt. But behind the flash, when our eyes adjusted again, it had retreated into the fog and become a suggestion. We ran then, propelled by a will to survive that outstripped our reason. The ridge we had intended to climb became a blurred goal. Branches snagged our packs, our shoes slid. Behind us, the crunching followed with a steady tempo, like a second heartbeat. We ran without a plan until the trees thinned and the road reappeared, laced with headlights from a passing truck. We flagged it down with shaking hands and told the driver a story that he didn't want to hear. He looked at us like you look at someone who has just woken up from a bad dream. We left the gear. None of us went back for it. The ranger station that morning told us the forest had a history of sightings, strange figures seen in fog-drenched hollows, and that people over the years had a word for it, the Hollow Watcher. The term seemed to make the phenomenon banal, as if naming stripped it of danger. But names are a kind of armor. They give you something to point at. I haven't been back. I still wake sometimes to the echo of that rhythm: tap, pause, retreat, like a tide I can't predict. People ask if it was real. The answer is not neat. I know what we saw, what we smelled, and how the world rearranged itself around that presence. I also know how our minds stitch meaning into fear. If you go to Blackwater Hollow, be respectful, be prepared, and carry a light that won't die. And if the fog leans toward you, listen to the silence and consider going home. This story is over. Get ready for the next one.